Which piece of information you know because of your job or study will shock the average person? Story 1. About 20 years ago, I worked for a printing co. with a contract with a funeral home federation. We printed their everything, including a sheet sent out to funeral homes on wholesale casket pricing and the amount of profit to be made from the sale of each. Back then, a casket's wholesale cost was 10% of what they were charging consumers, so that $5,000 casket only cost them $500. I can only imagine the upcharge now. Story 2. I work in medical billing and coding in the US. 9 times out of 10, when your insurance denies coverage for a procedure or service, it's an error on how it was billed/coded by the provider's office, and you should research it with the billers and your insurance before you pay. Story 3. A shockingly low number of kids are actually on grade level, and they just get passed on, whether or not they're literate. When I taught English at a Title I school, I had around 38% pass, and that was considered good. When state tests were canceled in 2020, everyone on my Facebook was exclaiming, "They're just going to pass everybody to the next grade." But what if someone would have failed the test, but now they get to go to the next grade anyway? That is already 60+% of kids. The general public thinks that if they fail all their classes and the state tests, they have to stay behind because they're not proficient. Sadly, no. Story 4. That we really do try to design construction zones to get you through as easily as possible. A lot of thought and hard work goes into designing those traffic restrictions. Sometimes there just aren't any good solutions. We can't fix it if you're driving on it. And yes, sometimes we do tear up a perfectly good road. What you don't know is that the fixing we did 3 years ago was just a band-aid to keep the road drive able for 5 until we can finish the design to repair what's really wrong. That 1.5 inches of milling and resurfacing is holding the crumbling base together long enough to get the funding to do the real construction. Story 5. Expensive cars keep being expensive. The tires are expensive. The parts are expensive. The people who work on them are expensive. Buying a Porsche or a BMW isn't a one-time splurge. This might seem like a no-brainer to you, but I worked in a garage and I promise I saw someone having that unpleasant realization every day. Story 6. If someone has diarrhea or vomits in a pool, it doesn't need to be drained. In fact, draining the pool might even be less effective if proper disinfection procedures aren't followed after draining the pool. Instead, the chlorine level needs to be raised to at least 20 ppm for at least 13 hours after all physical pieces of vomit or shit have been removed. Doing this will kill any possible cryptosporidium bacteria in the pool. What does 20 ppm chlorine feel like? Simply by putting your hand in the water to get a sample will cause your skin to dry up. Edit. Pool needs to be closed for 13 hours, not 23. Story 7. I work at a union, and I think the average person would be shocked by the amount of abuse that is happening in the job market. Bosses strategically bullying their employees, jumping through tons of legal hoops to fire employees in the way that leaves them with the least benefits. Companies going through $100K worth of lawyers to avoid paying wages amounting to like $15K. Thousands of people every month, many of them not believing they would ever need a union, that their workplace would ever do something to them. And that is here in Denmark, with strong unions and solid workplace protections. I fucking dread how this would look in many other countries. I sort of knew it was bad before I started, but after 10-ish years I have sort of accepted that no one should ever really trust their company to not fuck them over, sometimes for stupid, petty reasons. Story 8. How rotten a lot of bridges are. I work in highway maintenance, and quite a few of them are in hideous condition and overdue for replacement. I can think of one where the deck is more or less held in place by gravity and moves up and down independently of the structure beneath, which is coming misaligned because of a lateral force put on it by eroding riverbanks. Fortunately, that one is finally under contract to be replaced this year. Story 9. I work in an upper management in large company, and I am shocked how often people think something is calculated, move with data that we analyze to come up with conclusion that X is the most profitable way. Even if we have analysts with data, most big decisions are done by some C-suite person or in a meeting. Nobody reading any data or maybe just a front page and then just saying, "Fuck this, we will do it this way," even if it completely contradicts the data. It's just a bunch of random guys betting on their hunch, rarely asking for data on anything. Even if something is calculated, it most likely is because we have a problem with it for X years and someone says we will do it other way and numbers turn out better. No longer a problem. There is not much logic running companies. Story 10. Half of the world's population has a nutritional deficiency. 3 billion people can't afford a healthy diet. 735 million people go to bed hungry every day. Food and agriculture is responsible for a third of greenhouse gas emissions and the vast majority of deforestation, land use change, biodiversity loss, and freshwater withdrawal. Story 11. Forensic psychologist. There are so many horrendous crimes that happen that never reach the news mainstream media, and that there are trends in which crimes actually get reported. For example, domestic violence is very in right now, and a hot topic, so you will see a lot of that in the news. It's not that it's actually happening more than usual, the reporting is just skewed by what stories will actually sell. Story 12. Physician. There are too many to list LOL, a few that come to mind. There is a large number of people living with a brain aneurysm, or some other form of blood vessel anomaly in the brain, arteriovenous malformation, that is completely asymptomatic and will go unnoticed, and may rupture one day with catastrophic consequences. Many hospitals have a mice infestation problem. A lot of doctors like to party and do a solid amount of drugs, off-duty, mostly. The overuse of antibiotics is likely to induce the emergence of superbacteria, it already does, that will probably lead at some point to an epidemic that will make COVID seem like a walk in the park. Story 13. I was an R&D chemist in the food packaging industry for many years. We made a coating for those little cat food tins, like Fancy Feast. Many people don't know that the expensive ocean whitefish tuna pate flavor only contains a tiny sliver of whitefish tuna. They produce it by taking little frozen blocks of all of the guts left over from the fish processing industry. All different types of fish. They put one little sliver of ocean whitefish on the top of the block and send it into a grinder. From there, it goes into the cans. Total rip-off. Not to mention the smell in that processing plant was god-awful. Story 14. Early childhood trauma is visible in teeth. Trauma in this sense is anything that causes a stress response in the body. Could be illness, could be parental separation, could be abuse, etc., etc., etc. Longer explanation. Teeth grow at a predictable rate, almost exactly like trees. If you bisected a tooth and examined it under a microscope, you'd see rings of growth. Growth is disrupted in times of stress. The first stress ring we all had on our baby teeth is from birth. Other stressors can create other disrupted growth rings in baby teeth, and the same is true for adult teeth as they are still forming. My former professor was a pioneer in dental anthropology. For his work on these stress lines, he'd ask his zoo colleagues to send him the teeth of deceased primates, or just teeth that had to be pulled. Would demand no other information be given at first. Then he and his grad students would section the teeth, put them under a microscope, and print out the pictures. They'd mark visible signs of disrupted growth, and with knowing that birth is the first disruption, and the rate at which teeth grow, they could then give day counts for every growth disruption after birth. Once they collected their data, my professor would then ask their zoo colleagues for the daily health logs for the primate. And what they found is that each growth disruption exactly corresponded to stress events in the primate's life. Some instances were from illness or the like. But to me, the most interesting event he told us about was seeing a stress line on the tooth that exactly corresponded with the primate as a baby, being removed from their mother for a period of time to do necessary health checks at the zoo. This caused such a stress response in the baby that it was visible in the tooth growth. Story 15. Electrical arc from a high-energy DC source, such as electric car battery or photovoltaic panel, is extremely hard to turn off once it gets started. Until the energy source is depleted, the battery does empty, but the panel will go on until it burns or the night falls. It burns hot enough to either vaporize or detonate anything it comes into contact with. Obviously, there are protective measures in place to prevent this from happening, but people have this annoying habit of thinking they are smarter than those things. Story 16. In the US, women finishing uni with an A grade have a harder time being recruited than those with a B. B better than A better than C, and so on. This effect is not present with men. This is due to the fact that women succeeding too much at uni are perceived as cold, unfunny, and nerdy in a bad way, whereas men with the same performances are perceived as funny, nice, and cool to be around. The effect described above is in addition to a worse global perception on women that is more obvious and well known. Also, the effect is more potent in science majors than in business or English majors. Edit. Bad English and more info. Story 17. I work as an office clerk in my state's Child Services Department. I see the files the frontline workers generate when they do investigations. home visits, removal of a child or children from a home, etc. There is, I think, a very prevalent attitude in our society that women are better parents because of maternal instinct or some such other claptrap. There are a lot of these mothers who are straight-up shitty parents. Not all of them, of course. And yes, oftentimes there are abusive/neglectful/asshole/absent fathers in the picture that do not make things better for the children. But having seen the kinds of things I have seen, there are a lot of women who have made very bad life choices, starting with having children in the first place. Many of these women have drug and/or alcohol abuse issues, more often than not stemming from some sort of underlying psychological and/or psychiatric issue, are neglectful of the children they are supposed to be caring for, and frequently very abusive to those children. And yet, the attitude that the kids are better off with mom is a very, very difficult attitude to overcome. Quite often, the kid or kids are better off with dad, as long as he's an active, mature parent who is there for his children, than they are with mom. Too many of these women have multiple kids with different fathers, or, more often than not, with unknown fathers because mom is promiscuous and/or have multiple partners. A lot of these women make shitty life choices and blame everyone else for their problems, instead of taking a good long look in the mirror and soberly reflecting on the consequences of making shitty decisions. A lot of these women are shitty human beings, period. And yes, of course, this also applies to many, if not most, of the fathers in these situations. I am referring here specifically to the judges, judicial system, police officers, who are inclined to give these women a free pass because she's the mother and it's best for the kids, is the prevalent attitude. Now, of course, this varies from agency to agency, and even agencies in different cities or regions of a particular state. But unfortunately, this is something I've seen time and time again. TLDR, a lot of the women in the child services system should never have been parents. Ever. And yes, of course, that applies equally to quite a few men in the system as well. Story 18. When you go to a restaurant and there are multiple empty tables and they tell you there's a wait, it's because the kitchen is backed up. Sure, everyone says, oh, I'll just wait at the table. Sorry, assholes before you who were given that opportunity and bitched incessantly about how long they've been there is why no restaurant will ever seat you in this situation, no matter how nice or patient you claim to be. Story 19. Many people are surprised to learn that the human brain produces enough electricity to power a small light bulb. This fact highlights the incredible complexity and energy efficiency of the human brain, which constantly generates electrical impulses to facilitate thoughts, emotions, and bodily functions. It's a fascinating insight into the amazing capabilities of our bodies. Story 20. As little as 1% of applicants for a job will get an interview. This is because third-party algorithms break down each applicant's worth and find most of them unworthy. The intent is to remove bias from the hiring process. It doesn't remove the bias from the people who created the algorithm. That is, having bad credit can cause you to be denied an interview, which can create a cycle of you can't pay your bills because you can't find a job, so you can't find a job because you can't pay your bills. Story 21. Those stupid little pillows on the bed in a hotel room take millions of dollars to design. I had a designer change their mind after we had already ordered and manufactured 300 rooms worth of stupid pillows, so we had to trash them all and begin again. Oh, and because the design is proprietary to the designer and the hotel chain, they can't be donated or sold. They just go straight to a landfill. Story 22. Strawberries are not berries. They're considered an aggregate fruit because their seeds are on the outside, and because the fruit consists of multiple smaller fruits. In the literal sense, the berry on a strawberry plant is an engorged, enlarged flower stem, also called a receptacle. Raspberries and blackberries are also not true berries, but are also aggregate fruits, because each seed is surrounded by a single droplet, and an aggregate of these droplets is what forms a blackberry or raspberry. Pumpkins, bananas, and peppers are all true berries, because they are self-contained fruits enclosing multiple seeds. Story 23. An enormous amount of posts on Instagram and TikTok are sponsored, either directly or indirectly, by major corporations and media groups. Almost nothing popular is actually just someone making a video or post. The money goes through a lot of hands, so the general public doesn't see who the post is sponsored by. Clean talk, paid for by cleaning and chemical companies. Testimonials on birth control, paid for by the Koch brothers, major right-wing donors. Cute tradwives making bread, paid for both by the rich family they are from and right-wing media groups. None of it is real. The people on there are being paid a lot to push a product or message to you. There is no law saying they have to tell you that fact. Honestly, they may not know the source. It scares the hell out of me that Gen Z thinks any of it is trustworthy or accurate information. Also, reality TV is heavily scripted and manipulated by producers and editors. It's not real either. Story 24. I'm a social worker, used to work in an ICU, which was mostly hospice-related care. Dying at home is not always easier or better for the patient. Home hospice, at least in NY, only covers an RN to come and visit maybe 1x/week. Occasionally someone to drop off O2 and supplies, and a social worker will come in frequently. If you're lucky, you may get a couple hours of a home health aide per week. The rest of the care is provided by family or a private hire home health aide. In addition to this, home hospice usually lasts between days, about 6 months. So that means you could be out of work and providing care for months. Lastly, medical professionals are not very good at estimating prognosis for a terminal illness. They can give a general idea, days, weeks, months, etc., but they don't have a magical countdown set up somewhere. Story 25. I work at the corporate level. True executive compensation is mind-blowing. I'm not talking about base salary, bonuses, and stocks. Those are public knowledge, and we hear about them every day. I'm talking the extra perks no one talks about. Things like mortgages subsidized by the organization, company cars that are 6-figure luxury vehicles, home insurance on the company account, company-paid private schools/tutors for children, wardrobe/beauty/fitness stipends, club memberships, access to the corporate jet for personal travel. I could go on and on. Imagine what simply not having to pay your full mortgage or car loan would do for you financially, much less all of the rest. Story 26. I think the sheer amount of information Google knows about you and how unashamed they are in trying to get people's data from businesses who utilize their ad services would shock people. I work in digital marketing, and yeah, Google are a nightmare. Their most recent thing is customer match lists. What this basically is trying to convince businesses to give them all their customer data as a way to have even more data. They try to spin it as, oh, if you do this, we can use it on Google Ads to showcase your ads to people who are the same as your existing customers, as they may be more likely to become customers. Which, yeah, I guess could work. But it is incredibly obvious they are doing it just to try and farm data. Google reps would regularly call our office about this, trying to get us to give them this info. And you will get recommendations through every few weeks, which try to push you into sending them this data so you can continue using their services. We refuse to every time, but I bet a lot of companies gave in. It's honestly so dirty, but the issue is Google is the most utilized search engine, so using Google Ads is kind of a must for most companies. They're really bad for it and have so much data on so many people. Story 27. You know that one really terrible road with all the potholes? Your city is intentionally ignoring it, because they need to do a full-depth repair whether they fix it now or in 20 years. So to make better use of their funds, they make the roads that appear totally fine a priority, as doing a sealed job or small patch repairs will make it last longer. They do this with pavement management systems. A person will go out and give a rating to a road section, then put all the ratings in a system and will come up with the most cost-efficient way to repair them. And sometimes that means that a really bad road won't get repaired for a very long time. Story 28. I work as a tailor on e-commerce photo shoots. The clothes you see on the model has been altered to fit them specifically. Some companies spend their money on tailors to alter the clothes before the shoot. Other companies spend it on post-production to edit the clothes after the shoot. I try to remind people that the images of clothes you see online are equivalent to a picture of a Big Mac. There are dozens of people whose job it is to make that product look as good as possible. Keep your expectations low. Story 29. I worked in retail banking for about a decade. Nowadays, every credit card will offer you your credit score, which is awesome. But before that, banks would get a report of your current credit score about quarterly if you had a loan or credit line with them. That information was readily available to the institution, but they weren't supposed to share that with you. Instead, we were supposed to direct people to the big 3 credit bureaus, where you were allowed 1 free credit report year, but often had to pay for updated credit score information. Also, at one point, it was incredibly easy for employees to look up any person that banked with that institution and see their transactions with no justifiable reason. Story 30. I used to work at a kitchen appliance company. Main thing they sold was rice cookers. All the upgraded versions of appliances are pretty much the same as the less expensive ones besides materials they are made of. The cake option on a rice cooker that seems fancy. It's not, it's just a rice setting, and they told us to come up with a name and design for a button. Sear and sizzle. That's another term a designer made sitting in a closet getting paid shit. Prices are only on who it's being sold through. That rice cooker in Walmart is the same one marked up 200% at Macy's. China doesn't care about copyright. Lots of the inner parts of machines are the same with other brands, since the factories building them sell your shit. If you want to spend $300 on a Zojirushi, go for it. But think twice before you buy a kitchen appliance that has a specific feature or button. Story 31. I work in housing stability and eviction homelessness prevention. I spend a lot of time in eviction hearings and have recently taken a state-mandated course in tenancy law ahead of a professional certification. I live in Arizona, which has awful tenant law, but so many people come into court with ideas of what their rights are that are totally incorrect or gathered from sources outside of Arizona. In this state, as a tenant, you never have a legal right to withhold rent, no matter what, no matter the state of the rental property, no matter how the landlord is behaving, no matter what. If you withhold rent, and especially if you then freely admit that at your eviction hearing, that is grounds for eviction. These hearings are not made to determine what's fair, but simply what the correct course is based on statute, whether there is legal basis to evict, and how much, if any, is owed in damages. Story 32. I used to work for insert large soda company here. In quality control, and even during training, it was clear something was a bit off with some of my colleagues. This number is a bit low. Just bump it up a bit so we don't get an alert. Later that day, I gave in this number and it gave an error. Just enter is being tracked as a comment. All errors had to have a comment by them, meant to explain why they happened and what you're doing did to fix it. Now, to allay some worries, the errors were like tiny fractions, a percent off here and there, nothing major. And most people there were quite good at doing the right thing. It was mostly those guys working nights and weekends you had to watch out for, 24/7 factory. But still, for them being so anal in a lot of other things, everything was tracked and traced in minute detail, and every measurement entered into the system had someone's name on it. For some things, even 2 people had to sign off. Cans were taken off the production line at the beginning, middle, and end of every tank/run/shift, and kept for 6 months after the best before date, more on those later, at room temperature. So if someone opened a can of dark brown famous fizzy caffeinated beverage somewhere and it was bad, but ours were still good, it meant we weren't the problem. But if ours was also off, you better know they could laser point exactly whose ass was on the line even a year later. Can filled at 15.40 on the 5th of January, production line 2, that would be, and on best before dates, well, all cans of one product produced in the same month got the same expiration date printed on them. So 2 cans with the same best before might be produced weeks apart. Also, no, I don't know the recipe. Yes, it is true it arrives in 2 different syrups we have to add in different ratios, but we don't know the ratios of the ingredients in those syrups. Even the men making the syrups don't know, as they're made in 2 different factories, each with different proportions.